guys, it's Amy with 804 Sycamore, and in this video I'm excited to show you how I took a modern farmhouse wall treatment idea and added a vintage twist to it. You're probably familiar with board and batten, and you may have heard of a picture rail. So I combined both, and I helped save my walls from many holes hanging different artwork as my style and taste change and as seasons change. And now I can use the picture rail system to hang different artwork and mirrors and pictures and stuff. So be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this video, and let's get going. So my first step was measuring my wall and then sketching out my design. And to help me determine how much space I wanted between my battens, I used an online calculator, and I will go ahead and link that in the description. I found it very helpful in helping me to determine the pattern I wanted. And then I went ahead and located my studs. Now this stud finder, it's one of the magnetic ones. I also have a laser one with a button, and it works fine too. And so after I found all my studs, then I went ahead and cut my quarter round piece. This quarter round piece of wood will help me transition from my original baseboards to the 1x6 bottom board. Now, if you know anything about cutting wood, I'm totally cutting this wrong. Make sure you lay the flat side on your saw. I don't know why I did it that way. Then I didn't use any liquid nails. I just put the quarter round flush and attached it with a 2-inch 18 gauge brad nail on each stud. And I had to use 2 pieces of quarter round, so I cut a 45-degree angle just to make the patching and connection point more smooth instead of a straight 90-degree cut, and it worked out really nicely. And so this part, it's an inexpensive way to add a transition and a nice flow to your board and batten. After cutting the second piece, I wanted to do a finish at the very end for it to round off. And so I did a couple tests and determined I needed one side to be 45 and one side to be 90. The 90-degree goes against the wall. The 45 hits the other side of the transition piece. And so that's just a way to, it's called a return. You're just returning it back to the wall, so it's not just a blunt edge. And that's really preference, but if you're wanting a professional job, I would say cut a little return to finish off that edge, because it is a round piece of quarter round. So I just used some wood glue and then my painter's tape to hold it securely and while it dried, and then I was good to go. Now with my quarter round in place, ready to transition from my baseboard, I went ahead and started cutting my 1x6. Now my 1x6 will go at the very bottom, and it will also go at the top. Now usually you don't use the same thickness, but when I add my picture rail to the top piece of 1x6, it shortens it visually. And so I decided to just keep it a 1x6 on the top as well. Again, where the 2 pieces meet, I'm doing a 45-degree so that it's a smoother finish where I patch where they connect. Now, we had to cut it in half because we have a smaller SUV. And otherwise, you could always get them delivered so that it's one long piece and you don't have to mess with the 45-degree cut. Again, I used liquid nails because I wasn't necessarily going to get into every stud. At least, by the transition where the 2 boards meet, there's no stud there. And so I'm depending on my liquid nails to really help me to hold it nice and snug. With a couple nails. So I use 2-inch brad nails, and they're 18 gauge. When I use my brad nail, I always test it into a piece of scrap wood and make sure that the nail goes in just the right amount. I would like to add some patch and paint so that you can't see any of the nail holes, so I don't want any nails sticking out, and I also don't want them too deep, especially if you're using small trim pieces like quarter rounds and smaller trims like that. So I cut my first batten, and a batten is the vertical boards, and they are about 7 feet tall. Now, my wall, just for reference, we have 10-foot ceilings plus that large piece of crown molding and our baseboard, and it's about 14 feet wide. And there's 2 outlets, a cable box, some things, another outlet in the middle, because we have put our TV on this wall. And so I had to calculate, I used the calculator to make sure my battens would not be getting in the way. Now, I got this tool for Christmas and I absolutely love it. I double checked it with a real measuring tape, but it's so much easier to use a digital reader, and you just need to make sure that the laser point hits the wall, and that will give you your accurate reading. So once I have the liquid nails up and a couple spots done, I'm using my level to make sure that all the way across I'm getting into the studs with a level board. I'm sure our floor is uneven, our ceiling's uneven, so I couldn't just cut several 7-inch battens. I had to measure each one and cut it exact so that I wouldn't have a gap between the top of the batten board and the top crossboard. And of course you can measure it the standard way, but I love this digital reader. It gave me the exact to the decimal that I needed to cut. And when I used my calculator, my board and batten calculator, I knew the distance between each batten, and so I went ahead and cut a board, and that guided me for the bottom and the top placement of the battens. Now, I got pretty lucky with all the other outlets except just this one cable spot, and so I'm going to show you how I went ahead and I really just measured and marked the exact spot on the board, and then I used my jigsaw with a new blade, make sure it's a fine tooth blade, and then I'm just going to finesse it. You go nice and slow, and you can see my left hand is helping to guide, because I don't know if you've used a jigsaw before, but they can be there's a lot of vibration, and so I used my left hand, which is totally clear from the blade, to help me keep it nice and steady, because this is a pretty small little notch that I'm cutting out. But once I can get my blade in there, then it was smooth sailing all the way to the end. So now the board fits perfectly around, and when the wall is done, it's going to be covered by a picture anyways. But with caulking and paint, it blends in seamlessly. So as you can see, I'm adding that top board to help me make sure they're the exact distance apart that I want. Now you can measure and mark, but I love using the board across the whole way. It ensures the same distance for me, and it's just faster and easier. And then I like to nail in my battens kind of at an angle, even though I'm using liquid nails. It just gives a little more security with the nail. I wanted to show, using the digital reader, I had to make sure that the laser pointed at the top board. You don't want it going all the way to the ceiling. You don't want it hitting the wall before the top board. And that allowed me to cut the perfect fit. So I highly recommend that digital reader. I will link it in the description as well. So I'm just a few boards away, and you can really see the shape coming together. It's a traditional board and batten wall, but I'm going to add that extra vintage touch. And as I mentioned, this is about a 14-foot wall, and so having 2 sets of hands for a couple of the points was very helpful. And full disclosure, I also cut the picture rail board incorrectly. I had the curve on the bottom, and so I'm not showing those cuts because they are not helpful. But I also did the 45-degree angle at the transition mark, and was able to seal it and patch it and make it look seamless. I will go ahead and link to this picture rail. You can find a lot online, but they can be quite expensive. This is poplar wood, but I'm going to prime and paint everything, and I love the shape. I tested it with my picture rail hooks, and it was a perfect fit. So I don't want texture in between my battens, and so I'm just taking mudding compound, adding some warm water, mixing it really well, and then I'm going to go ahead and roll it on and smooth it out. I would say this step is totally optional, but my husband prefers the smooth look on a wood finished wall, and so I went ahead and added it, and it does look excellent and more professional. Now I will say for this part, I rolled on the first layer and then I troweled it smooth, and I started on the right because I haven't skim coated walls for a while, and I will say there is more little bits of bubbles and rough spots on these far spots, but I got pretty good by the end. You'll also notice that I went ahead and taped off everything. I did not want to have to be super careful with my trim pieces, and when I removed the tape, I wanted that nice smooth wood with no lumpy bumpy spots. I didn't want to have to do extra sanding, so I highly recommend going ahead and taping off anything to protect surfaces that you don't want mudding compound on. Now we have a kind of more flat orange peel texture, and it was fairly easy to skim coat, but we did need to do, I did 2 coats, and you need to make sure you let it completely dry in between your coats. And rolling on this first coat, it kind of gets exciting because you're kind of seeing the wall flatten, but the second coat is really where you can get the nice smooth finish and really fill in any of those extra bumpy spots. So when your mudding compound dries, you can actually see spots that you kind of missed because you can see the original wall through it. And so I don't roll the second coat. I'm just using the trowel and I'm putting it on thicker in some spots and then trying to keep it all nice and smooth. I don't want any bumps. I don't want any hills or valleys. I'm just really trying to find the spots that maybe need a little extra and get it all smoothed on. Once the second layer is dry, I went ahead and used a 180 sanding sponge to only sand off any little rough spots, tips. I'm not adding a ton of pressure. Once your skim coat is dry and sanded and totally dust free, you've wiped off all the dust, you can remove your tape, and then it's time to patch the little brad nail holes. I use patch and paint. It doesn't require sanding, but I have sanded it when I found a little rough spot. Once the patch and paint dries and those spots are smooth, I go ahead and wipe all the dust off because when I'm caulking, I don't want any dust around. I want the caulking to have a smooth finish. I don't want any grit or grime with the caulking. Now, I like to caulk. I caulked a whole rectangle space, and then I used warm water and my finger and smoothed it out. If you get excess on your finger, just have a paper towel handy or washcloth to wipe the excess onto. Now I just use the all-purpose caulking. It's paintable, it dries quickly, it works really well for me, and then I'm just using a real basic caulking gun. It has the built-in cutter, but I like to just use my own cutter to get a nice angle so that when I'm going down, it kind of already has that slanted tip. And of course the most satisfying part is smoothing out and getting that nice finish in there. It just covers any issues and gives that nice complete look. So I did not film cutting in the primer. I figured I could show that with the paint, but once I cut in on each batten, then I went ahead and rolled a primer onto the skimmed wall, and it soaked it up really well because it's mudding compound. And so make sure you prime, and I like to use Kills because it covered any pencil marks I had, and it just gives a really nice coverage. After one coat of prime, then I was ready to start with my paint. Now, in between each coat, I like to use a 220 grit sanding sponge and smooth it out, and that really helps to remove any air bubbles, textured spots that a brush or roller leaves. It's awesome. So the steps are prime, sand with 220 grit, wipe everything clean, then paint again, sand, wipe, and then paint the second coat. When I was younger, I did not know about sanding in between coats, but I'm here to tell you it is worth the extra step and smoothness that you get. So I'm not an expert painter, but what I did is I painted all the inside of the battens just with a brush, and then for the woodwork, the battens and the top and bottom boards and the picture rail, for the picture rail I used a brush, and then I used a 4-inch foam roller for all the battens. I personally like the foam roller because it gives a nice smooth finish on my smooth boards, and then I just use a 3/8-inch nap roller for the inside spaces. I think my biggest tip with painting, because like I said, I'm not a professional, is to go slow. If you start going too fast, you're not going to get great coverage. You add air and texture to your strokes, and so just take it easy and go slow and get the job done right the first time. Now, I do play pickleball, and so all of this painting and sanding and wiping clean and caulking and everything, it was kind of hard on my shoulders, so I did recruit my oldest daughter to help me with some of the rolling, which saved my shoulder quite a bit. Okay guys, so if you like this video, please subscribe. I'm going to show another video of how I actually use the picture rail, and I absolutely love how it turned out. I will link to how I built my floating shelves in case you like those, but I love the added architecture it adds, and it's just a beautiful wall, especially in person, and I can't wait to hang different artwork from the picture rail now that I don't have to put any holes in my wall. And I did this close-up so you can see, I have little bits. I didn't do a perfect job, but with everything monochromatic, the alabaster white paint, it's hardly noticeable and it looks really beautiful. So just as a reference point, our top and bottom boards are 1x6s. Our battens are 1x4s. The picture rail is about 2 inches, and so it kind of cuts into the top board. And the spaces are 25 inches apart. They're in between the boards and about 7 feet tall. Thanks so much for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.